Hi there, this is Phil with PhilFX. Got another tutorial here. I've just finished a number of tutorials on UV mapping and how to work with UVs, how to edit UVs, and now that we've got that done, we want to be able to do something with those UVs. So what we're going to cover in this tutorial is how we take those UV mappings and utilize them so we can put textures onto our objects within Maya. So let's go ahead and get started. So we've been working with my ray gun here, and let's go in real quick and we'll check the UV mappings that I have on this cylinder. And if I go in and we take a look at the UV editor, we can see that I've created a nice set of UVs. If we go in and I put a checkerboard on there so we can take a look at that, we can see that it's fairly distortion free. Tiny little bit of distortion as things stretch out a little bit on these end caps. That's a little bit unavoidable due to the nature of the shape. Inside in the center of the cylinder, things look to be pretty good. If I go over here and turn that off and we look at the overlaps, all the color looks good, there's no overlaps, and if I look at my distortion maps, it's fairly clean. Things are pretty much of a uniform color. So we're pretty much ready to go ahead and create and utilize this UV mapping so we can put textures on there. So one of the first things you want to do, and there's really two main ways of doing this. One way is to export a picture file, and that picture file is your UV mapping that I have right here that shows these UVs, so you can take that into your favorite picture editing program. In this case, I'm going to be using Photoshop. So you would take this into something like Photoshop, and we would then create a picture with that. That's what I'm going to do in this one. There is another utility that's within Maya called working with a PSD network. And I'm going to create another tutorial right after this one that will cover how you work with UVs using the PSD network that's built into Maya. So let's go ahead and get started with this. So we've created a set of UVs. I'm happy with them, and I want to go ahead and I want to create some textures now using Photoshop. So first thing you want to do is you go to Polygons and go down here to UV Snapshot, the bottom menu here, and we'll click on that, and that brings up a dialog box. And what this does is it's going to create a file, and you can set the image format. I'm going to set a PNG file, but you can pick any one of these. If you're working with HDR, you may want to actually, you can't create a high, you wouldn't want to do that, excuse me. You wouldn't want to create an HDR image, but you can create a TIFF, an SGI, a PNG, and a JPEG. Typically, you're going to create a JPEG or a PNG. JPEG meaning that you don't have transparency, a PNG that you do. I like to work with PNG files, so because I do want to support transparency. So I'm going to save it as a PNG file. You typically want to keep a square aspect ratio. This is where you set the size of your texture map. In my case, I'm going to use a 1024 by 1024 bit texture map. And the default is to save the texture map in the images folder within your Maya project. So if you set things up with a Maya project, it's going to put them right here in these in the images file. And I'm going to save this to out UV, and I want to overwrite what's there. The color value is what is the color of your lines. So you can make the lines any color that you want. You can make the lines white, and if I do that, say it's okay, then it's going to make the colors of the lines that I bring in white. I tend to work with a transparent background, like I said, in Photoshop. So actually, when I save things out, I prefer to save it with a black background because that shows up just a little bit better. So I'm going to save this that way. I'm going to overwrite that file again. So now let's go into Photoshop and take a look at what that UV file looks like. So if I go into Photoshop And I'll save that PSD out. You can see I did some work before on that. So let's go ahead and we'll open up that file. So I can open that file. So we go to working with UVs and we go to images, and here's this out UV file. So let's just take a look at that file as it is. So this is what that file looks like. All right. And you can see it's got a transparent background, and the UVs are made with a black outline. Now what you want to use this for is this is essentially a reference outline. So you want to put your textures inside a picture and you're going to align them with this reference outline. So the way that I really end up working with this is I don't work with the PNG that I generated. I like to go in and I generate a new file. And I've gone in and I've created a preset that's not that one, but this one. Yes, I've created a preset for Photoshop that's a 3D texture that's 1024 by 1024, and so my height and width are 1024. Resolution is 72 pixels per inch. RGB color, transparent. I do keep a color profile on that, and pixel aspect ratio is square. And so let's go ahead and let's just call this Ray Gun 2 texture. All right. I'll say okay, so that opens this up. So I've got this transparent background, and the next thing I do then is I go in and I place, and I like to place linked. Okay, so I keep everything together. So I'll place linked, and I'm going to place linked this out UV PNG file that we created. So I place this, and now I'll accept that placement, and this puts in a layer the UV layout. All right, so then I go in and the next thing I want to do is I want to get some textures. So one of the favorite places I like for textures, maybe you've got a picture that you worked with, maybe you're working with a drawing. If you don't have that and you're looking for some CG textures, one of the best places, www.cgtextures.com. This website has just a boatload of all kinds of texture maps that you can use for your work. And just for the purpose of this exercise, I went in and was just looking at some different kind of metal that we have here. And I was looking at different kind of interesting metals that we can find. And I ended up, I'm not sure if I can even exactly find all of the ones that I ended up picking, but I'll just go ahead and show those to you. So what I ended up getting was I got this picture right here. It's kind of like the end of a railroad drum. I want to put that on the end cap of my cylinder. And then the other picture I got was this textured kind of metal. I thought that looked interesting, so I was going to wrap that around my cylinder. So this is the other picture that I got from that CG website. And like I said, you could spend a whole lot of time looking through there, and I think you'll find a whole lot of interesting kind of textures you can use. So the first thing I want to do is let's go in here in Photoshop and we'll place linked one of those two pictures. Now, when I brought the pictures in, I put those in my source images folder in my Maya project. And so here's this bare metal, and that's that end cap. And let's go ahead and place that. And place this right here. And let me increase the size of this just a little bit. And I'm gonna go ahead and just place that right now. And actually what I want to do is I want to put that underneath this, so my reference, I can see it from the front. So I'll go in and get that bare metal, do a Command T so I can do a transform on that, and I'm going to move that so it's about in the center, and then hold Shift and Alt so I can scale and keep things centered. And I'm gonna just scale that out. And you can see what I'm doing is I'm essentially placing this picture so it puts it properly around the outline of my UV map. Okay, so if we go back down, that looks pretty good. All right, and then I want to place this picture again. So I'll go in and I'm just going to place linked. And I'm going to place that same picture because I'm going to put it on both end caps. And let's blow this up a little bit. Put that in the center. Use my arrow keys so I can locate that in just a little bit better. And same kind of thing, hold down Shift and Alt, grab the corner and drag. That keeps things centered. And move that just a little bit. So now we have that centered in. And it is placed that texture within the data extents that you can see of my UV mapping. All right. So the picture is not quite symmetrical, but that's not really a problem. I can go in and, like I said, I can kind of line things up, and that looks good for that. And so let's go back out. And then the last thing I want to place is I want to place the texture that's going to go in here. So we'll go in and place linked again, and I'm going to get that funky texture. And I actually want to take and rotate that, so let's rotate that 90 degrees. And let me zoom in just a little. Take and place this over here. And I can scale that down just a little bit. And we want to make sure that it covers all of the UVs in its placement. All right, so if it goes outside the border just a little bit, that's not a problem. And that looks pretty good right there. All right, so now I've got all my UVs mapped there and all my UVs here, and I want to save this file out now because this is going to be my texture map. Now when I save this file out, I don't want these UV grids on here, because if I save it with those, they're going to be in there and you will see those UV grids. So we want to turn that off, and then I want to go in and do a save as, and I'm going to save this. Actually, it's a good idea to save this as a PSD file so you can go back and edit it. So I'm going to first save this as a Photoshop file. So that saves my texture as a Photoshop file. And for this exercise, I really don't want to load a PSD in. What I want to do is load a JPEG. So I'm going to do a save as again. And now we're going to save this as a JPEG. And we're going to have Ray Gun Texture 2. Save that as a JPEG. It's going in my source images folder. We do a save as, accept that. And so now let's close this down. And now I go in and I have my cylinder here. And at the moment, the texture that is on there is, if we look at the attribute editor, is Lambert 1. So it only has the default texture that comes with when you create a new object. And you obviously don't want to go in and be putting textures on your default texture. So what you want to do is create a new shader for this particular object. So I'm just going to go in, right click down here and assign a favorite material. And this is probably going to go off the screen, but I'm just going to pick a Fong because I want this to be somewhat metallic looking. So I've got this Fong shader here, and I'm going to call this Ray Gun Cylinder _ Fong. All right. And the color that we want for this is going to be our texture file. So this is where we go in, and this is how we place that texture map. So I click on here and I say I want the color to be a file, and it pops this up, and now it's looking for a file, and I go to here and it defaults to source images. That's why I went in and saved that to the source images file. And if we look right here, here is my Raygun 2 texture JPEG, and I'll open that up, and lo and behold, there we go. So we've put that texture map onto my cylinder, and it maps exactly the way that it maps per the UV mapping that we did. And one of the questions I get from my students is, do I really need to work that hard in making sure that I don't have any distortion on those UVs? Do I really need to make all my check boxes so my checker boxes so the boxes are square? And the answer to that question is yes, you do. If we go in and I show here's that. Let's go in and put this UV mapping, so we see this UV mapping the way it is right there. And let me go in and purposely grab UVs, and let's see which ones are these. Okay, so here's these right here are the UVs that you can see going around there. Well, I'm purposely going to stretch those, and let me go in and really distort that. All right, so you can see I'm really making a bad distortion on that. What does that do to my texture? Well, if I go in here and I turn this off, you can see what I just did with my texture. All right, by not having my UVs be rectangular, and when I see distortions in my UV mapping, this is what happens to your texture. Your texture gets highly distorted. If I undo that, okay, everything goes back to normal, and now my texture is not distorted. So yes, it is. It's very critical that when you do your UV mapping and you're working with that checkerboard, you want to make sure that those boxes are not distorted, because if the boxes are distorted, you're going to end up with some difficulty, and it's going to cause you some problems with the texture that you place onto your object being distorted. So we've got a nice clean texture on there. Let me just show you one real quick trick we can do right here that's kind of interesting. If I go in and I add a what is it that I'm looking for? Here we go. So I'm going to add a black and white texture to this, so it changes the whole picture to black and white, so there's no color. And then the next thing I want to do is go into my levels, and I'm really going to make this pretty extreme with the degree of my levels. All right, and so I'm really pushing the black and the white, you can see, to some extremes there. All right, then I take this and I save this out and do a save as, and we're going to save this as a JPEG, and I'm going to call this Raygun Texture 2 _ bump, and I'm going to save this black and white as a bump map. Now it's important that when you're creating a bump map from your picture, you save it from the original picture so everything lines up the same as your texture. So we save that out as a bump map, and now I go in here, and if I go into my node editor, we call up the hypershade, and let me delete it. Let me clean everything out in here, and I want to get, let's see, here it is. Take that. So here is the texture that I just created, this Raygun cylinder _ Fong. And now what I want to do is I want to add a bump map to that. Well, the way you add a bump map is we go down to our Phong texture, and I got to right here to bump mapping and normal mapping. So I click on this checker box, and my bump map is going to come from a file, and I go over here and I need to give it that file. So let's go over, and I have this ray gun texture 2 bump, so I add that in there, and so now I have a bump map file. And so then if we look at my texture, you can see what that bump map did. Now that's fairly intense in terms of the degree of the bump. So if I go in here and I can modulate that bump depth, and you can see by changing that, I can make this go either positive or negative, so I can make the bump go in or make the bump go out. And it doesn't take much to give you an effect of some texture. So the default when you place a bump map is for that bump value to be 1. All right, that's pretty intense. If we had a bump value of say 0.1, that's a little better, and it gives us the effect of some 3D texture to that with that bump map, but without overkilling it there. So we covered how to create a texture, how to bring one in, how to export your UV mapping, take that into Photoshop, create a nice texture layer, then use that texture layer to both place the texture onto your object, and also if you want to go ahead and use that texture so you can create a bump map and place a bump map onto your object. So this has been Phil with Phil Effects, and catch you later. Have a good day.